Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second Sunday series sponsored by IMCW, the Insight Meditation Community of Washington. And I'm here this morning to welcome our wonderful speaker this morning, Rhonda Magee.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's beautiful to be with you. I really thank you for welcoming me into your beautiful community. It's nice to see all of the faces that I'm able to see and to feel your energy already.
Welcome, Rhonda. And I'll be saying a few more words about Rhonda and her book that will be the center of our conversation today. I'd like to welcome the whole global community who's here today. People are zooming in from many different locations, and welcome to you, whether it is morning for you as it is for myself and Rhonda, or whether it's afternoon or evening. Welcome to everyone. I'm Trish McGarry, and one of the teachers in the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, and also a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. And that's the primary way that I have known Rhonda as colleagues, MBSR colleagues. Before her beautiful book and all of the many lectures and workshops that she has generously been giving over the last several years, but especially since the book has been published. Our series today is every month and will continue for the rest of the year. So just one word about next month before we get started today. Next month, we'll be meeting on Mother's Day, which is May 9th, with Kristen Neff, a conversation of Kristen Neff and our IMCW teacher, Jennifer Stanley, about Kristen's book, Fierce Compassion. Fierce self-compassion, how women can harness kindness to speak up, claim their power, and thrive. And you can register for that through the imcw.org website. And in conversation with Jennifer Stanley, who's a dear MSc colleague of mine and an IMCW teacher as well. So I'm so happy to be welcoming Rhonda, who brings really a lifetime of lived experience and professional work with these issues. Rhonda is a lawyer and a law professor at the University of San Francisco, and for many years has been doing her own work as a Dharma practitioner, along with other lawyers, as well as teaching and bringing these issues of mindfulness, the intersection of mindfulness and racial justice into the law school curriculum. And as I mentioned, for this past year really has been offering a wealth of information and support for many, including myself, have really leaned into in this last year of racial unrest and the opportunity for many of us to do our own inner work. So I'd like to hold up her beautiful book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. As a way of beginning, I'd like to just offer a very brief meditation for us all to arrive today, to ground ourselves and to welcome ourselves into these moments just as we are, knowing that the step of grounding is so important and is one that Rhonda writes extensively about her book in her book and suggests for us as a first step. So perhaps bringing along the awareness that we're here together, even as you move your attention to yourself, just as you are. You're invited also to bring along the awareness that you're not alone in this moment, that in a very real way, we're here together as community, as Sangha. And perhaps in that same way that you were in your own heart, perhaps welcoming Rhonda into our time, perhaps offering that same kind of welcome to yourself in this moment, just as you are. As you begin to bring your awareness from the outside to the inside, to your own body, I'll invite you to bring along kindness and friendliness, allowing yourself to be just as you are. Perhaps sensing your body sitting or standing, lying down, whatever your position is in this moment. Sensing the supports beneath your body, inviting your body to settle into here and now. On this Sunday, April 11th, 2021. And as you settle your awareness into your body, perhaps taking a couple intentionally deep breaths. Deep breath in and out. Perhaps for just a moment or two, adding a intentional movement that might remind your body that it's okay to move and breathe and take up space. It's okay to be here, that your own presence and body is valued. And as you sense yourself perhaps settling back into the stillness in your own time, allowing the breath to return to its natural state, and also knowing that you can come back to the sense of the body, to these deeper breaths, to the grounding at any time you'd like during our time together. Perhaps right now, sensing not only the chair or cushion or couch that you're in and resting in that support, but also dropping awareness to your feet, or if you're on a cushion, your legs and feet. Sensing that support and stability beneath you. Beneath the floor, the earth, perhaps taking a moment to sense this place of here that you're on, this planet Earth right in this moment. And perhaps a particular connection that you have with the natural world, some aspect of nature that might be uplifting, supportive, nourishing for you. Perhaps taking a moment to really savor it, whether it's the sound of birds or the view of the ocean, the sense of the ground beneath us. Perhaps inviting this connection with the earth to be with you during our time together this morning. Perhaps taking a moment to honor the traditional peoples who have lived on your particular land, as I will right now, honoring the Timucuan people, the traditional peoples of northeast coastal Florida, where I am in this moment. And then perhaps sensing your roots going down and out, connecting us today, sending roots down and out. Bringing along this awareness of being here together as I invite you now to receive the words of Professor Rhonda Magee, some words that she writes at the beginning of her book, a poem called If the Path Could Speak. And perhaps placing a hand or two on your heart, or giving yourself a gentle hug, or holding your own hand in your lap as you receive these words, to invite not only the mind and body, but also the wisdom of the heart to be received in the heart. If the path could speak. Beneath these words rests the awareness of generations, and of generations, and of generations that have come before. The awareness that each of us is a vital part of the earth that we call home, is of the wind, the rain, the fire, and so inherently belongs. If the path could speak, it would say, we must assert that which exists deep within us, namely, a sense of kinship with all those with whom we share the earth. We must assert that which exists deep within us, namely, a sense of kinship with all those with whom we share the earth. On repeat, in every language, unceasingly. The words of Professor Rhonda Magee. And now it's my pleasure to turn over the floor to Rhonda.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. My fellow kin who joined today. It's good to be with you, and thank you so very much, Trish, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you for the honor of reading the poem that I wrote as a kind of a lodestar or touchstone for what it is that I was trying to offer with this book. And I want to also thank our ASL interpreter. So grateful to see you. Really, really grateful to see you. It's a measure of that inclusive aspiration and ethic that I love to see and love to participate in with you. And Trish and I talked about me sharing a few words here, and she knows I shared with her. Once I start, I never am quite sure how long I'll go on this. But just to say, we have planned to have me open with a few remarks, and then we'll shift at some point, perhaps, into a conversation or a bit of reflection back and forth, and then we'll shift to some Q&A, have a short meditation at the end before, well, not ending, right? We go on being impacted by each other, even when this particular frame for our meeting comes to a close. So we will transition into the rest of our days with as much hope and joy as we possibly can at the end of our session. So I first and foremost, I want to thank all of you who have taken the time to be with me here when things could be otherwise, and surely there are many, many, at least equally compelling ways to spend time today. Thank you for choosing to be here. And so I'm pausing to honor the fact that you chose to be here, actually. Really inviting that kind of check-in and honoring that, that inner bell, if you will, that woke you up again to your practice, again to your commitment to Sangha and community, practicing in community, and just to particularly supporting this conversation. Themed around my book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, and the subtitle, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. It's quite a lot to have proposed in a book and in conversations. It really is. So so every time I come together with folks around it, I'm like equal parts humbled, right? I mean, because I'm very aware that each of us has our own very, very unique 100, I mean, like somehow beyond our ability to fully articulate, right? The radical differentiatedness of our experiences and uniqueness of our experiences. So the book was partly meant to be a kind of opportunity to embed in our meditation practices and our commitments to awakening much more permission and practice and support for really examining that very unique journey that got you here. That very unique journey that got you here. And to do that in a way that deepens all of our ability to open the aperture on that part of our experience that travels in the language of race and racism in particular. For so many reasons, but partly because in my own experience, number one, race and as a feature of my own identity and the way in which I'm met in the world has always been relevant. You know, I often say in these presentations, my age, my birth year, to kind of like name the arc that I'm coming to you from. So I was born in 1967, actually, in North Carolina. So that time and that place. Where were you born? What time? What was the year? What was the world into which you were born? What was that community like? And how is that a part of, in some way, conscious or not, how is that a part of who you are and how you are right now? Opening the aperture to that kind of inquiry has been, really one of the inspirations for my book. So meditation on the stories of our lives and opening that ability to see the theme or the strand or the aspect, the kind of structure around the structure that embeds race as a feature and racism, by which I mean not necessarily explicit ideologies and teachings around the different races and differential value and worth, because that's a traditional way of thinking about racism, about ideologies and a whole kind of set of commitments to hierarchies of value tied to racial categories. And in the United States, I'm a law professor, I've studied this quite a bit. That commitment really ran across all our institutions, was completely supported in law and policy and in the application of law and in policing and in the churches and in the schools and in medicine. It was like a total commitment to hierarchies of value that made people like me very systematically vulnerable to disregard, harm, disrespect, abuse, exploitation, right? As a cisgender woman with brown skin, right? And there's so all the trainings around, not just racism, but intersecting with all the trainings around, the hierarchies around gender. We call patriarchy sometimes. So really understanding that as we come together to sit and meditate, and especially right now in the Zoom world, it can look so much like we're just all completely equal in the sense that we each have our equal size rectangular tiles visual, right? And although more and more we're aware that there is still like the dynamics of, well, who's sitting in what type of space, and all of the ways that even the Zoom visualization is a social process, and there are all these questions around ethics and equity, right, that travel with our experience of Zoom. Nevertheless, it can feel like like if we're here, we're relatively equal. We each have our rectangle. We can put up our hand in the participant box and all of that. And yet, is it so? How is it so? How is it maybe not as so as we like to think, as we might prefer to think? Noting our preferences in terms of how we think about these things. Noting our preferences. Yeah, so it's this idea of just really bringing permission, and not just permission, I'm going to say this, encouragement for us to really examine our life stories, how we are the habits, patterns, and conditions of thought, of emotion, of being that have formed, and I sometimes say have deformed, right? If I can say that in a way that is availing and not shutting us down, right? We've been formed and sometimes deformed. In other words, we've been shaped by the environments we've lived in, inevitably, by the communities, by the institutions, by the norms of those. And those include, of course, how we orient to different types of bodies and how we are received by different types of bodies, because again, that's been a training of our culture. And by which I mean, again, not necessarily that we sat in classes and got grades for this, but you all understand this is a sociologist in me. I studied sociology at the graduate level before going to law school. We're constantly being socialized, right? Trained by our cultures in subtle and not so subtle ways. Joke culture. Hello, do we speak to each other? Do we acknowledge each other on the street? Were we ever punished for bringing someone home or suggesting that we might bring somebody home? And on and on. Did we hear of people being punished for bringing somebody home or suggesting they might bring someone home of a different race, a different background? So even if it didn't happen to you, have you heard of that? And if it did happen to you, what did you make of that? Is it just an incident? So opening up that aperture, and with I'm just going to now say, with recognition of two things, that we all, again, have radically different stories and experiences, although they may rhyme, so to speak. They may have something in common that we can say, oh, okay, I understand. I saw something like that too. And here's what I've seen. So different stories that metaphorically, they rhyme, they allow, they're resonating somehow. So that we, although our experiences are very, very different, we can understand each other. We can have some empathy for what each other has experienced, even if it's very different from ourselves. And that's where, for me, the compassion part comes in. Recognizing that we've all suffered a lot around race and racism. Some of us and some of our communities, a lot more than others. That's the nature of racism. That's sort of the point of it, actually. But that doesn't mean that we haven't all in other ways as well suffered. That doesn't mean, in the words of a book that is now on a lot of folks' new reading lists, The Sum of Us, by Heather Magee, in which she makes the case that, one of the reasons why we have failing infrastructure, have, so little compared to other advanced in industrial nations of, the nice things in life, reliable healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. One of the reasons why we struggle to just take care of the commonwealth, the common good, is because of racism, and it's impacted public education, impacted health, impacted policing, impacted workplace culture in ways that are not necessarily obviously about race. They can seem they're race neutral, but they're impacting us. And so when I describe racial injustice, I talk about it as the actions we might take to alleviate the root causes, really, of the harm that racism causes us all. The actions we might take to alleviate the root causes of the harm that racism causes us all. And for me, that means there's personal work of the sort that I've been reflecting on. How am I in this? How was I trained for racism, actually, in subtle ways, to accept it, to go along with it, to be complicit, even if not to be right at the front of the line advocating it. And I'm saying this because sometimes if we know we weren't at the front of the line, we've never been at the front of the line. It's like, well, I don't know if I need to talk about racism because I've never been that racist, right? But the inquiry may be then, how have we been trained to be complicit in racism? And how have we gone along with that training And right now, I want to say that this is none of what I'm saying is meant to evoke emotions like shame, that complex of emotions that we call shame. But I know sometimes this conversation can do that. So just to name that, that's also one of the reasons why I think it's really important for us to embed embodied mindfulness in these conversations, because we can very easily get emotionally reactive and shut down. Shame does that. So kind of be on the lookout for, the way in which we as human beings can go into reaction when we feel ashamed. But just the fact that we might go into reaction, of course, is to me, not an indication that we're doing something wrong necessarily. It's an invitation to inquire and to support ourselves. For me, I think it's worth looking at these issues through at least three realms or spheres of engagement and practice. Again, I've alluded to the personal. Where have I been complicit? Where have I actually gone along with, some contemporary racist narratives or political thought because there was some other stuff coming that I did want? Or how have I, in some ways been willing to sort of live in a world where racial harm and the normalization of this idea of hierarchy of value, how have I been willing to just not see that as so much of a problem, partly because it hasn't impacted me, my kids, my neighborhood. And I want to speak this part as well. I want to just say, white folk on this call, I'm using language of race, which in and of itself, it disrupts a pattern, which is right, the pattern of like, nope, we don't actually name race much. And when we do, it's usually either by or about somebody of color. And we've been shifting that pattern in the last number of years, but by which I mean like just in the last maybe 5. But with that shift, and I guess I'm speaking to this culture in I'm drawing from primarily US centric experience here, although I know we're in an international community. So the question is, what's it like where you are? What are the groups? What are the subgroups? What are the hierarchies of value where you are? What are the cultural narratives that justify including some and keeping other people at the periphery? And what are the, not just cultural, but other habits, patterns, conditions that we've become accustomed to, but that something might be telling us we might need to look at? Maybe our mindfulness practices, our compassion practices are telling us people are being injured by this. And maybe we didn't intend it, but it's happening. And maybe we've gotten used to the way things were and we don't like change, but this is happening. And so because partly we're talking about, especially in the US and in Western cultures, but not only in Western cultures, these habits around white supremacy and the hierarchy of race that valorize whiteness at the top and others in different ways at different places. The hierarchy is not just completely linear. There's triangulation. There's all kinds of dynamics amongst and between people of color. We see it in the anti-Asian hate moment right now, whereby African Americans and Asian Americans are sometimes pitted against each other and sometimes are experiencing tension that can come with fighting for the sort of crumbs at a table that's meant to privilege other people. So there's complexity here. So I just want to say that whatever our background, I do believe there's work for us to do. Whatever our background, I do believe there's work for us to do. As a Black racialized woman, obviously there's work for me to do to unpack the ways that I've internalized patterns of anti-Black racism, or, you know, anti-Indigenous sort of disregard. We've all internalized some of these habits and patterns and conditions. And to create not only space, but I want to say kind of a moral or ethical call to look at that as part of your mindfulness practice and mine. That's why I wrote the book. And to see this as like an ongoing part of our practice, as part of how we seek to do no harm in the world. So that personal piece, then interpersonal piece, how are we then with each other? How do we acknowledge who we are, who's here, who isn't? For example, can we look at this community and invite an inquiry into what racialized identities are here disproportionately, and what identities are not? And why is that so? And what are the implications of that for who feels safer or more included and who doesn't? And how are we feeling about that? What's it feel like to people to be in this community? People of different backgrounds. I sometimes, when I look at the tiles, for example, I do see, again, this is all very, in the US, we used to use, the courts in the US used to say, well, race, kind of, you know, they would talk sometimes about biology, and then sometimes they just say, well, but we know it when we see it. We basically use an ocular test. Literally, that's a term from American law, ocular test. We look and see if somebody looks white, and if they do, we'll accord them certain values, and right? And otherwise, if they don't look white enough, then they're not white. This is literally a part of immigration law cases in America. And it was important in immigration law for since the 18th century, right? Because right after we enacted the US Constitution, the very first naturalization law, federal law that would allow people to become national citizens in 1790 in the United States, embedded whiteness as a criteria. And I think that history is a painful one, and some of us have known that for a long time and have therefore understood how it might be the case that white nationalism might come and go in our culture because this has such a deep groove. And some of us haven't looked at that history. And so we've been surprised that white nationalism has shown up again. And when we talk about it and look at it, it's difficult for all sorts of reasons. If we've been taught to be colorblind, taught not to talk about these things, then we don't have the language, we don't have the comfort. But I think it's important to at least look at these things. But we have to do it with a lot more sophistication than we have been. Because if you just raise it, it can often invite people then to sort of re-embrace narratives of whiteness and re-embrace the idea of a battle, a race war, and of a United States that should be white, because in 1790 we said it might be. So here we are. I just want to stop there. But the last thing I'll say. So the three domains of work: personal, as you know, interpersonal. How are we? Can we name? Okay, this may be a disproportionately white racialized community or sangha. How are the people of color? Who are folks? Why are we disproportionately white? Let's think about it. Are we okay with me? It is what it is. What are the implications of that? That's some of the interpersonal to systemic collective inquiry that we can bring to bear. And I've sometimes, even on Zoom, invited things like to feel what it might feel like to be centered or decentered around your racial background, to invite, for example, folks who identify as people of color to lean in, and folks who identify as white to maybe turn off their visuals for a minute and just be able to have those folks of color have the experience in the Sangha on the Zoom of feeling like this is our group or different folks of color. I mean, so that's a kind of an actual dynamic practice that we might do. And then through that experience, oh, what's it like to open up the tiles and see a lot of faces that don't look so much like mine, which is an experience people are having. What's it like? Y'all want to try that just for a moment? Let's do it. Let's see if you're willing. If you are white racialized, white identity, or others would identify you as that. See if you're willing to just turn off your visual for a moment and allow the people of color who are here to have that momentary experience of they open it up and the folks that they see are really more people who are of color who kind of are here in some numbers. When we open up page after page, it's like, wait, up here, there, I don't see, gotta find. But now if we're willing to allow this space, as I see you all being willing to do, just pause and take a breath and see, first of all, lean in, see each other's faces. Hi, if you're willing. Hello, good to see you all. And now I'm inviting all of you whose visuals are here, feel what's happening in your body. Is anything shifting? Anything shifting? Yeah, something is shifting. Notice that. And I'm seeing the smiles on your faces. I'm seeing you, and you all are seeing each other. And I'm seeing the love emoticons showing up. We're here. You're here. And your being here matters. Yes. So I'm seeing in the chats affirming. Yeah. So take a moment to breathe in and feel your belonging here. Of course you belong. Your inherent belonging, and you're mattering. And the love that exists here for you. Feel that. Yeah. Sometimes we need spaces like this. And sometimes we need moments like this where we can recognize each other and to see that, this community is diverse, and yet we are often interspersed. So kind of pause for a moment, appreciate this experience. And then I want to invite participants who have closed their cameras to come back, but to come back and notice. Yeah, if you want to say so, yeah, say in the chat what's coming up. Yeah, I love it. I wish there were more faces of color. Yeah. Now, if our white racialized brothers and sisters will come back in. Now, just feel what happens. Feel, and for my white family members here, what was it like to actually create space for your family members of color? To like literally step back. And some folks are like, I really don't want to come back. It doesn't feel right to take up more space. That could be the feeling. And I'm right here. I don't have a script for this. Yeah. Thank you for being willing to do this for each other. Feel what's happening in your own community. First of all, I'm seeing that you've got a broad community of support saying, we see you and we are with you and we appreciate you. Yeah. Can we trust in that? Did that resonate? That you are part of this community. Yeah, that's saying, look, we see you and we will give seed space to you. Folks have said, I don't even really necessarily want to come back right now. We don't want to take up more space. Yeah. And folks may come back as, again, the door is open now. The door is open. But I want you to just remember that in moments like this, you're really being invited into an embodied practice, a practice of enacting your values. The value of, all right, I'm going to cede space a little bit, which is part of what justice may require. Shifting resources, right? sometimes just saying, okay, we're going to give the resource of Zoom in this moment more to the faces of color we haven't seen. We might give it to the voices. How are y'all? How are you doing? What's it been like this last week? I don't know about you, but it's been a hard one. Actually, this last year has been a really hard one. But with the Chauvin trial and extra shootings, it's been the anti-Asian hate, the rise in consciousness around that, of course, has been with us forever. I'm from California. I know this. It's been a part of California's history. It's not new. As has anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous, constituting California. Anti-Latinx, constituting California. All the racism and schism right in our state, this beautiful state, the sunshine state, the progressive state. It's also a racist state. It's also a state with a long history of white supremacy. Yeah. So there's a lot. I see that some things are coming up in chats. Let me see if I see it's hard to go back and forth with chat while we're in a space like this, but I do just want to take a moment. Yeah. Yeah. And as we begin to bring this segment and this part of it to a close, I really do want to invite, again, the sense of those who want to be brought back in to come back in. I see a chat that says it felt a little bit like being on a playground and recognizing that sometimes folks get called into a circle and some folks don't, right? So the child in us gets triggered a little bit. It is, and the child, of course, is with us all the time. And we're always being invited into groups or not. And just think about how the dynamics around white nationalism or some other kind of nationalism are about that child. Some child somewhere who's still trying to feel like they're in the in group. How much of it also might just be about, again, already having been privileged and not wanting to cede it, because it's not bad to be, it can feel good to be that group who is presumptively entitled to be in charge, whether they're confident or not. It can feel good to be in that place. This is why it's a challenge for some of us who identify as heterosexual to create space for our brothers and sisters who are or who are not, or those of us who are cisgender, to create space for those of our brothers and sisters and family members who are not, who are trans, who are gender fluid. In other words, having been the presumptive norm, when we become aware that, oh, there are others that notion of norm is systematically leaving out, the transition moment, the change moment feels destabilizing. How many of you know something about that? We've all, in some measure, right, felt a little bit of like, oh, wait, okay. Oh, people see me in this respect as being part of the oppressive group. And I don't think of myself as being part of that group, but in this respect, I'm, as an African-American woman with roots in the South, not raised with a lot of consciousness of immigration dynamics and the pain of anti-immigrant rhetoric and exclusionary policies. That wasn't my experience. But when I came to California in particular, I was in for a learning opportunity. And the choice for me seemed apparent to continue to be unaware of what my brothers and sisters who were recent immigrants, whose families were immigrants, who were called out of their name by kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric and made vulnerable. I could either turn a blind eye to that because it's not my experience and how could I ever know, or I could try to understand it and try to learn and try to not just ally, but be in solidarity with people whose backgrounds are different from mine. So that's been what I've been wanting to kind of allow to show up in my life. And I think the practices of mindfulness can help us with this if we want them to, but they can also not help us with this if we don't. And that's why I wrote the book. So I'm going to stop there, my dear Trish. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rhonda, for such rich remarks and helpful. So I'm thinking that we'll just take a moment to allow those remarks to land. So as I come back to the moment, this moment right now, one that my own heart is feeling so grateful for you and your work, and also the work that you did with us and our community this morning here, and pointing out some of the disparities here on Zoom. And the lenses that we bring to this work. And I just, as before we enter our conversation, just really want to acknowledge those lenses that I'm coming to as a straight, cisgendered white woman, a woman raised in a very deliberately white community and very much socialized in that through the lens of white supremacy. Really want to name that, that is the lens, and that the conditioning that I acknowledge, and the conditioning, it's kind of the starting place. And I just want to bring us to kind of the structure of your book, which I personally have found very helpful, starting with grounding and then seeing, and we did some of the seeing today, just seeing, who we are and the lenses that we're looking through. And of course, there's a lot more to each of those phases. And then you also talk about the steps after grounding and seeing to being and doing and finally liberating. I'm just wondering if you could say a few things about those. And this is such a big conversation, but those particular steps. And I'm really curious about this last tidbit that you threw out, kind of a challenge to us as a mindfulness community, that we can use our mindfulness in the service of, but also that the mindfulness can get in the way of. So.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you all, really. I can feel your being. I can feel you. And even over Zoom. I can only imagine what would it be like if we were together, but we are, right? In a different way, even if not physically. So grounding, really important, because so easy to get taken off. So right here, right now, I appreciate it very much, Tris, when you had us pause and take in, what we're experiencing right now. So right here, right now, feeling the ground beneath us, which in this moment and in every moment that we live and even beyond, we will all share this one earth. All of our ancestors, they've been right here on this earth. They've lived on this earth. And in this moment, despite our distance and miles and cultures and experiences, right here, right now, the ground beneath us, one. The air that we breathe, we share. We know this, right, with coronavirus. We are radically interconnected. So just grounding in a feeling of belonging that includes this sense of the body as this soft-bellied, carbon-based being needing desperately water to survive and air. And we're fortunate to have these things if we're able to be here. And so just naming that and acknowledging gentling ourselves, because it can be painful to recognize some of these things that we're talking about. It really can be. So just creating, again, as a Qigong movement, embracing the tiger. I feel like when we turn to race and racism, whew, we are embracing that tiger. And we're coming home to the mountain right now. Come on home to the mountain. Once again, breathing in, out, and bringing the hands out to embrace this tiger. Racism in our lives. We will embrace this and figure it out and come home to the mountain. And I don't really mean we're going to figure it all out, but you know what I'm saying. We're going to bring mindfulness to it with that fierce, courageous energy that we can do this. We've been rendered fragile. We're not fragile. We are inheritors of a human tradition that goes back beyond time, right? Beyond memory, where folks have gotten through some things as individuals and communities and villages and collectives, and we are the survivors of that tradition. So we can do a lot more than we realize together, if we try. So grounding in that sense of who we are, and where the fact that we can do some things, and also that we need the support of water, earth, fire, the fire in our belly, the warmth of the sun. Yeah, we've forgotten how much we have all survived and will if we want to, and if we try together. So just feeling that, grounding in the elements is a practice that I offer. And from grounding, seeing what there is to see, and then deepening our ability to be with what we see, which is what we're doing too now. As we breathe in and out and pause, breathe again, remind ourselves of our radical interconnectedness, and remind ourselves of the love that brings us to these moments of practice together. It's not here by accident. I'm just going to name that love motivates me. I mean, like many other, folks who have fought and died over the years for some notion of justice. It's love, right? And so there's that grounding, seeing, being in love, frankly, and being with each other, and practicing to deepen that capacity to feel our kinship and feel our connectedness, even in these difficult times when we're talking about the differences that we live with. And then from that place of being, doing things together, like we did today, mixing it up a bit and reflecting on it, but then maybe coming up with new policies, coming up with new programs, in our community, in our institutions, all these things that we might do based on the insights that we're having about what other work can be done. I've created classes bringing in immigrant folks and people from different backgrounds to look at race through these different lenses. I've worked with immigrant communities and done pro bono work to try to help deal with refugees. I've done a lot of different things to try to enact something that is arising out of practice that I feel like I can do from where I am. And I'm a law professor. I got these classes. The question is, where are you and what can you do from where you are? And the feeling, the liberation that comes with that last piece, the liberation that can come with it. The sense that, we've done enough for today. We can rest our head knowing we took some action. We didn't change the world because the world is bigger than any one of us. But if you take some action, and then you can rest feeling like, I did what I could for today. Let me take a deep breath. Let me feel the freedom and support of this life while I have it. Right? So that there are many ways that liberation can be a part of this too, and also joy. But just coming back to that last point that you asked me to at least touch on a bit, a lot of research has shown us, and if we look at our own experience, we've probably seen it, mindfulness by itself does not necessarily invite you into engagement around racial justice and injustice. But if you choose to, I mean, it should, I think. It for me, it inevitably does, because of the ethic of non-harming. And racism has caused so much harm that it seems to me, if you're not engaged in that. But so here we are. And I think that if we take seriously the ethics of care and non-harming underneath mindfulness, then we can really readily see that some kind of engagement with social harm is our part of our practice. Part of our practice.
Yes. And as you speak, I'm thinking about, part of mindfulness for me is the potential for action. Right? That the awareness of what's happening, that seeing is part of it, but it's not all of it. That there's the potential for the response, the mindful response, the action that comes out of that awareness of what we're experiencing, the clear seeing of the moment.
Yes, the potential for action. And given that we're radically embedded in a social world, almost always, unless, we're monks, right? We're always we came through two particular human beings, whether they were the best parents or not, or even people we knew. We came through. One woman with the help of one man. And this is the radical embeddedness of human community in and amongst each other. And so we're always acting too. Always, we're going to do something. I'm going to choose something when I get off this Zoom call, right? I'm going to eat some food that's going to connect me in some way or another with working people around this community, and maybe, different parts of the globe, depending on what I choose to eat. So every moment that we do act, frankly, has some political implication, frankly, has some opportunity to wake us up and be more intentional about our choices. And those choices reverberate. We know this. This is what mindfulness helps us see. It's not just about how the practices help clarify our mind and help us do more at work. It's really, though, an opportunity for reflective engagement with, how am I living? How do I want to live this life that could end any moment? How do I want, what if this were my last day? What if this were the last week? What would I let go of in terms of a grievance or in terms of some project? What would I prioritize in terms of how I want to be, at least with the work that I'm going to be doing over the next week or two? This is what mindfulness to me is about, really. So thank you, Trish.
You're welcome. And the other theme that I'd really like to get to, because it's so, if it's okay with you, because it's so strong in your book, that one of the surprising and really beautiful, touching, helpful things about your particular book and your voice is how much love and compassion is just infused in every single page, in every chapter, in every practice. And I'd like to just state the definition from your book about justice that you use, because it is so beautiful and an example of this as well. That you say that justice is love in action for the alleviation of suffering, and that justice begins with our awareness of the present moment, extends through our caring for ourselves, and shows up in the love we bring to interactions with others and our responses to the social challenges of our time. Just infused with compassion, and many of the practices in your book really are related to not only mindfulness as the base, the grounding, but also very much related to self-compassion. And as so many coming to this topic feel perhaps some sense of unworthiness from whatever conditioning, that self-compassion is often an antidote to that unworthiness. So I'm wondering if you'd like to say more about that, and perhaps if you're willing, perhaps even lead us in one of your beautiful practices.
Yes. I actually just recorded a self-compassion course that'll be out there on an app near you at some point, because I definitely feel that what I use the phrase personal justice sometimes to encompass how I find my own practice of mindfulness is just like that friend when I need it, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or um, lonely or disconnected or anxious, which I never had anxiety until this last year. But now I think I understand when my students have been coming to me saying, I'm feeling anxiety. All of these discomforting emotions that can come up in our lives for any one of us. For me, my mindfulness practice and my mindfulness, or by which I mean meditation, practices of awareness, but embodied practices. So not only sitting meditation, but qigong and yoga types of movements. These practices that we have lovingly inherited from our Asian heritage brothers and sisters, whose cultures and communities and some of their teachers have kindly taught and offered. And this is not to say there hasn't sometimes been appropriation, but I have studied not only mindfulness-based stress reduction, where you and I met, Trish, but through Buddhist teachers who were taught by teachers who hail from different parts of the Asian diaspora. My own partner's family is from India, and it was reading a book off one of the shelves on our shared bookshelf 30 years ago that really opened me up to meditation as a kind of way to help reconnect me to the capacity to center myself that my grandmother knew something about. My grandmother, who was born in 1906 in North Carolina in a kind of a time of restoring white supremacy and patriarchy, and never went to education beyond elementary school. Started every day with the centering practice commitment. So to me, self-compassion is right there to support those of us who know something about suffering. And whether we call it mindfulness or not, there are practices we can draw on. So if we can take a moment and just feel any way in which we've been feeling discomfort in this conversation or this week, this year, some of the grief that might be present, some of the physical suffering that might be present. I've already placed my hands over my heart. You might experiment with placing hands over the heart, or just one hand over the heart and one just beneath the belly button. And just noticing, as neuroscientists will tell us, that these touch points can bring us some measure of a sense of support as you breathe in and out, feeling the sense of your own beautiful hands, these hands that have comforted loved ones and helped young ones feel supported. Now just being offered with kindness and love right to yourself as you breathe in and out. Perhaps naming this is a moment, whether this moment literally or this week or this year, this is a moment where I've felt some suffering, some difficulty. I'm not alone. You might inwardly repeat these phrases. I'm not alone in having experienced suffering. I'm not alone in having experienced suffering around race and racism and witnessed that. As a human being, I know something about othering, belonging, about being trained to ignore that or to or having internalized some of the pain of these histories. So just in this moment, I bring kindness to that part that knows something about this suffering. And I recognize that I have the capacity to honor my experience and to bring love and care to myself in moments like this, because I too can begin again. We can begin again together. So this kind of just pausing and offering these supportive phrases is just one practice. And it's good to know that you all have my friend Christian Neff on, who also offers obviously a lot on self-compassion. My effort is to, again, to help us see the connection between self-compassion practices and this ethic of social engagement. Recognizing that our social embeddedness makes us more vulnerable to certain types of pain. And so, yes, we actually do deserve extra support, and we can give it to ourselves. And frankly, again, I think those of us who know we come from heritages where we know something about suffering, we probably have teachers in our own families. You do, just like I have. Maybe a grandmother, maybe an aunt, maybe somebody in a community, somebody in a religious tradition who you're thinking about right now. And know that even if they wouldn't have used the word mindfulness. Part of what brought you here and what strengthens you is that you've seen a way of moving through the world that keeps you grounded and keeps you centered on your values and your ethics. We look for those people and we remember them in moments like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for that beautiful practice. And I just want to also acknowledge everyone who's been on the call and who has sent in your questions. And I want to honor your questions and thank you. And that both Rhonda and I have seen your questions and have some of you sent them in ahead of time. And Rhonda framed her remarks to address some of those questions, and some of the questions that I asked as well took into consideration those questions that were sent in advance and also that came through. And I invite those of you who, the question that we didn't come to, perhaps bringing it into your own practice, your own communities, your own sanghas, to carry those questions forward. And as a way of ending, Rhonda ends her book with some very beautiful metta phrases, and I asked her if she would be willing to offer just a brief metta practice for us.
Yes, and I just went ahead and put my course that I mentioned on self-compassion will be on this app called mindfulness.com. But you can find, you can find me out there. And I just want you all to know that I feel honored to be a part of this community with you here. And I always feel like there's no accidents. So I feel like we're going to be part of this sort of big sangha, whether we realize it or not, anyway, from here, my dears. So feel free to contact me. You can easily find me on the web, and I'd be honored to feel myself to be a part of your practice and kinship community from here. So yeah, thank you, my dear Tricia. I'd like to offer a closing meditation, and if you don't mind, I will use a bell. My teachers, often Buddhist teachers, use a bell, so I'm the sort that will have one handy. And so what I want to just do is offer a gentle invitation into loving kindness. And this is going to be an altered practice. We're not going to do the full, we can't, in the interest of time, do a full loving kindness practice. But if we may, just pause for a second together. Allow the bell that I'm ringing now to support you in really giving yourself permission to center and to focus on these phrases that are offering of loving kindness that includes each of us, but is not limited to each of us. It's not only for ourselves, but it includes us. So right here, right now, taking a few deep breaths. Ha, ha, ha. And perhaps allowing the sound to come out. We know that's a trauma sensitive way of supporting our body and kind of integrating and releasing some of what's coming up that's difficult for us. So breathing in, ha, breathing out in the way that if we were there, maybe we could hear, ha, your own body just releasing, relaxing. And as we breathe in, feeling the strength of ancestors who've gone before, whose wisdom is in us, whether we realize it or not, is part of the magnificence of our life. This sort of beautiful way in which being human is both the most ordinary thing. There are literally billions of us. And yet it's this miracle that we will never fully appreciate. And our lineages, our heritages, the places we've lived, and the aspirations that we have to live in more harmonious ways, they're all a part of who we are right here, right now. So if you would please, I'm going to offer these gentle phrases of a loving kindness meditation, and the invitation is for you to inwardly repeat them to yourself. Again, holding yourself with compassion as you say them and sensing into the will you carry for the alleviation of suffering that is not only for yourself, but that touches your community, touches your family members, might be a light in a suffering world right now. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well in body and in mind. May you be safe from inner and outer danger. May you be truly joyful, easeful, and free. Again, just sensing, and if we had more time, we would just sit with those phrases and come back to them and allow them to, whether they feel really, like we can land in them right now, or we're just mouthing the words, trust that if you open yourself and allow your heart to be present to these phrases, something important can happen. Repeating now inwardly and silently these phrases, may we each and all be filled with loving kindness. May we be well in body and in mind. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. May we be truly joyful, easeful, and free. And as you breathe in, feeling this as an offering extended to you, as you breathe out, feel the way in which you're extending this to one person on this call in this community, one person on the Zoom that you can see, maybe another. And imagine this circle. Imagine us as if we're sitting in a circle wherever we are connected around the globe. In this last series of phrases, imagine extending the wish of loving kindness from us, from this circle, to all those in our communities and maybe encircling the globe. Again, may we be filled with loving kindness. May we all be well in body and in mind. We wish for this. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. May we be truly joyful, easeful, and free. May it be so. Thank you all for your being here. May you be well and safe on your journey from here.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for your generosity, your wisdom, your compassion and love. Thank you to everyone who has joined today in support of our second Sunday series at IMCW and also our collective awakening, our collective liberation. I would highly recommend, if you haven't already seen Rhonda's book and you have questions about today and about the path forward, that her book can be an accompaniment to you with many, many beautiful, beautiful practices. So thank you again, everyone, for your time, your attention, your care, your love. Until we meet again.
Thank you all. Be well. Until we meet again.